For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Dimakatso Motau. Author and political activist Professor Raymond Sattner is in the studio to talk to us about non-racialism and race issues. Raymond, welcome.
Thank you very much.
The question of race still remains the biggest issue in South Africa. Do you think we are making progress in moving from a racist to a non-racial society?
I think that the question is how one measures this, and some people feel that the question of race is no longer a factor. And I, however, feel that black people are still experiencing indignities, inequalities, which are inherited from apartheid and still continue. In this area where Creamer Media is based, Bedford View, Eastgate and so forth, one can see both very good relations on an interpersonal level, where black and white meet together on a cordial basis, where black people have gained confidence or regained confidence and their sense of self-worth, and that this is affirmed by many whites. But if you stand in the queue at the bank at Eastgate and there's an African teller, you'll hear mutterings in the queue very often, and people saying, oh well, he must be or she must be using an abacus or something because they're taking so long. So you get this undertone of racism, and I think when we talk about non-racialism, we are not, I'm not pretending I've got the answer to what it means, but it seems to me that you're also talking about redress, finding ways of addressing inequalities, and I think we have got a long way to go with that. There's something called the Gini coefficient, which measures inequalities in the world. And inequality in South Africa is one of the greatest in the world, one of the worst situations, and a lot has to be done still. And that inequality is basically, the fault line is both race and class.
You say that many are impatient for racial categories to disappear. What do you think motivates this?
There's both a liberal and white racist reason, and there's a left-wing approach. On the level of many whites and many liberals, they say that if you perpetuate categories of race, black and white, what you're doing is preventing the achievement of a non-racial society. They talk about race fixation, racial thinking and things like this. Now the reality is that for most or many black people, race is a reality. If you very often see aggression towards black people. If you go to a restaurant, the way in which a white waiter is treated and the way in which a black waiter or waitress is treated is very different. There's often racist words being used. Some people are charged for it, but most get away with it. And if you're being, so these people say you're perpetuating race by referring to it, but in fact it is a reality. On the other hand, you have some left-wing people who say race is an unscientific category and there's no such thing as race. And anyone who keeps on referring to it is not really a non-racialist and has no part in the liberation movement. This is what Neville Alexander, who's a professor at UCT, has said for many years. Now, the problem, and what he's trying to do, is to remove race as a factor at an intellectual level and concentrate on class, because he's interested in achieving socialism. Now, the problem is that you can't just conjure away racial factors by the scientific status of race, because scientific or unscientific race is a social reality. It's a social category on which inequalities have been created between black and white. I think when we measure how far we've gone in removing the need for taking cognizance of race, we have to remember that in 1994 there was a situation where if you went to the rural areas, electric wires would go over rural villages where Africans were and to the next white town. And it's only since 1994 that some people have had electricity for the first time, had water for the first time. Some people I know had to write about some of these things when they had never experienced them in school. They had to write about electric switches. And the first time they used a switch was when they visited relatives in a big city. So it's only now that for the first time people have got water, electricity. It's uneven, but it has happened. And in some of these areas, people say it has changed their lives. So we have to, on the one hand, recognize that insofar as these differences were not entirely related to race, but primarily related to most of the wealth being in the hands of whites and most of the poverty being identified with black people, that has changed to some extent, and there are a large number of Africans and black people in general who have become big capitalists, but not the biggest when you look at the economy as a whole. I mean, not the section of black capital on the stock exchange is probably about 6%, if I'm not mistaken. Creamer Media would know better than me. But it's still minuscule, but there is a substantial number of the black population who have become wealthier, but it remains, as Thabo Mbeki controversially said, but I think he was correct, there still continues to be more or less two nations.
You say in your column that Africanism is not necessarily a divisive force that is opposed to non-racialism, and that being black conscious does not mean you are anti-white. What do you mean by this?
There's nothing wrong with Africanism or black consciousness in the sense that both of these are forms of self-assertion and reclaiming dignity and asserting pride in heritage, history, and things like this. You must remember that colonialism was a way of imposing European knowledge and belief systems and displacing what was there before, devaluing it. Some historians said that Africa was a continent without a history. There was nothing there before the white man came. Whatever you wanted to do there, you were writing on a clean slate. Now, what is positive about Africanism and black consciousness is that insofar as colonialism and apartheid sought to treat black people as inferior, it sometimes did get lodged within the consciousness of black people. Some people did start to believe that they were in fact inferior. You have people who would say to their children, don't think that you are a white person. Don't act as if you are white. And I think that is a reality. And what Africanism and black consciousness sought to do was to recover the self-confidence of black people, African people, and not to ask that their cultures be tolerated, but that their cultures be recognized as having positive contributions to South Africa and the world in general. Now, the danger with Africanism, to some extent black consciousness, is they can sometimes be chauvinistic and antagonistic to other peoples. You've sometimes seen anti-whiteism, anti-Indians, and anti-other minority groups. And I think when one engages with Africanism, black consciousness, one has to always engage with it with a view to avoiding these sorts of tendencies. Now, many people after Soweto Rising of 1976, when they left the country to take up arms, I have found this in interviews that I've done, they said, I want to go back and kill the whites. And the ANC said to many of these people, look, our enemy is not the white people, it's a system of apartheid. And we are not going to give guns to everyone. The most important thing for us is not the weapon, but the person behind the weapon. And the person must have an understanding that what we are fighting for is to build a society where black and white live together as one people. That is why the Freedom Charter says, we the people of South Africa, black and white, declare for all the world to know, and then they set out a number of rights, and then they end off by saying something like, hand in hand, black and white together, we move in this sort of way. Now, that doesn't happen just by magic. You have to build that. But building that doesn't require that people drop African nationalism or drop pride in being Africans. And I'm not suggesting that there are inherent values in being an African, that there are some values that have been passed down from generation to generation that are automatically of value. There's some customs that have to be examined in relation to the Constitution. For example, there's a custom known as Ugutwala in the Eastern Cape, where women, young girls are abducted, raped and forced into marriages. Now, this was a custom. It's been revived in recent times, but we have to ask ourselves, custom or not, is that compatible with the Constitution that we have? So Africanism must become a source of pride, but it must be examined in a constructive and critical manner so that it can be a part of the building of a new South Africa.
You argue that in order to achieve non-racialism in South Africa, the social base of inequality needs to be removed. What do you mean, and how should it be achieved?
Yes, well, I have partly answered that in that racism can be described as, on the one hand, a psychological prejudice between people, or interrelationships between people that are hostile and based on racism. But institutionalized racism, which possibly should have a different name, refers to under apartheid laws which discriminate against black people, but also power relationships in the professions, in property ownership, in business, and land, a number of areas where whites were the first to get there, or they had already conquered black people and taken land. And many of the areas where property development has occurred, where factories have been built, have been areas where black people were not allowed to go, and in any case they didn't have the money to build such factories. And they are in the main workers in these factories, black people, or they are unemployed, or they are former workers on the land who are now landless. Now, we face a lot of those situations where, as the Constitution says, redress is necessary. If you want transformation of South Africa, you have to speak primarily, not exclusively, of the black population and try to find a way of empowering them. Now, too often this is seen as having a certain numerical proportion of black people in positions. Now, I think that that is important, but if you put someone in a position, you can sometimes set them up for failure. If you have not empowered them properly, if we do not, for example, you have people who have been out of school without employment for a long time, and they may need some retraining before taking a job. You have people in MK who are very good at blowing up buildings, but that doesn't mean that they are suited for other jobs. Now, these people may have been very brave, made very important contributions, and a retraining program has to be embarked on in order to enable them to contribute towards the society that we want to build. I think also, if you look at the professions, many white, I know the legal profession reasonably well. Many white lawyers complain that Africans and black people in general are appointed to be judges and they've hardly heard a case and things like this. And I think what you find in professions is that a profession tends generally to govern itself. In other words, the public doesn't govern how the legal profession operates, and they operate like a club. And I think what has to be done is we've got to find a way of making these professional bodies and professional institutional structures friendly to black people, but also to women, because it's very difficult for women to succeed at the bar as an advocate and to be able, they are usually expected to look after children, and it's very difficult for them to have the time to be a successful advocate. So there are a number of professions, schooling, all of these things where one has to pay particular attention to remedying the effects of apartheid. Not everyone starts at the same place on the playing field.
Donate now and give 15 Rand a month. SMS JOIN to 41486.